We are live.
Yeah. We are live. Lupina, you can start anytime.
Okay. So, very good afternoon to everyone. I invite all the delegates to this interesting online webinar on the principles and practice of immunohistochemistry, organized by the Department of Neuropathology at NIMHANS, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, Bangalore, in association with ICMLS, the Indian Confederation of Medical Laboratory Sciences. NIMHANS is renowned globally as an apex center for neurosciences. The Department of Neuropathology at NIMHANS has stood out as the nodal reference center for the precise diagnosis of the diverse neuroscience-related pathologies, catering to a multitude of neurosurgery and neurology centers across the country and abroad as well. So immunohistochemistry has proven to be a valuable means for the accurate diagnosis and characterization of scores of both neoplastic as well as non-neoplastic pathologies across various domains. And it has been a part and parcel of diagnostic routine reporting in recent years. And this webinar is being conducted to throw more light on the principles and procedures of different IHC techniques, how to maintain quality control, followed by an interesting discussion dealing with the practical issues and troubleshooting problems which we encounter in IHC practice. I request the audience to type in all your queries and doubts in the chat box provided, all of which would be answered by our experts at the end of the session. So very happy welcome to all the delegates. A special welcome to Mr. Kaftan Singh Sehrawat, President of ICMLS. He has played a key role in forming this society and has actively promoted academic activities for technicians around. Mr. Singh serves as a technical officer in the Department of Biochemistry at Kalavati Saran Children's Hospital, New Delhi. It's a pleasure to welcome you, sir. I would now like to invite Dr. Anita Mahadevan, the Head of Department, Neuropathology in NIMHANS, and the organizing chairperson of this webinar to speak a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Lafina. On behalf of the Department of Neuropathology at NIMHANS, it's indeed a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this webinar on the principles and practice of immunohistochemistry. A special welcome to the President of ICMLS, Mr. Kaftan Singh Sehrawat, and Dr. Kaul, Secretary of ICMLS. I think you will all agree that the vital ingredient to the success of any lab is the skill and competency of our technical staff. And I must say that we have been extremely fortunate to have a fantastic team. Mrs. Hemavati has been with us for 4 long decades. She mastered the technique of immunohistochemistry, but it is her passion and motivation for this art that has captured all our hearts. Several technicians have been trained by her in this technique, every step from the very basics of how to hold a pipette to record keeping. And to honor her contribution and dedication to this department, we thought it appropriate to have a webinar on immunohistochemistry to provide her an opportunity to share her vast experience. I think you'll all agree that immunohistochemistry has become a very important tool in our day-to-day practice. It's therefore important to know everything that we can about this technique, including the most frequently encountered problems and how to troubleshoot. Although now many labs have probably gone in for automation for IHC, anyone wanting to learn this technique, it is always better to start from the very basic and to know how to perform each of these steps manually. So with this in mind, we have put together this webinar for the very basics of IHC with emphasis on the manual technique. Actually, with this idea, we approached the ICMLS president, Mr. Kaftan Singh, who readily agreed to disseminate this information amongst their members. But I must say, we are astounded by the response. We have more than 1,200 people who have registered for this webinar. We sincerely hope that all of you who have registered will benefit from attending this. We'll be covering the very basic principles, a procedure as a video, and then we'll go on to quality control and documentation. But to me, I think the highlight will be the panel discussion, where the main heroes are our technical staff who will be sharing their knowledge and their experience with you. So let's just go on to the program we're all waiting for. I must say this is really an experiment, and we would like to undertake these workshops if you all tell us that it has been useful for you. So we really look forward for your feedback. I will hand the mic back to Dr. Nufina to start the program.
So without further ado, I would like to invite the speakers for the first session, Dr. Nandish, Associate Professor at the Department of Neuropathology in Enhance, and followed by Mrs. Hemavati on the principles of immunohistochemistry.
Thank you, Dr. Nafina, and very good afternoon to all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Nandish.
So the first session for today's webinar would be on very basics of immunohistochemistry, which will be like an introduction and a revision of the principles. So to start with, if you try to understand the basic meaning of histochemistry, the word can be divided into histo plus chemistry. That is, application of biochemical reactions on tissues to recognize the constituents of the cells. Now, if you take the terminology immunology, it is the scientific study of immune system, that is antibodies, antigens, and their interaction. Now combine all these three, that is immuno plus histo plus chemistry. That is, when you integrate all these three scientific fields, that will constitute immunohistochemistry. And the principle is like this: localization of antigens in tissue sections, that is histo, by use of labeled antibodies. And one second. By use of labeled antibodies as specific reagents through antigen antibody reactions that are visualized by a marker. There, that chemical reaction will happen if you may use a fluorescent dye to recognize, or an enzyme, or a radioactive element, or a colloidal gold. So in simple words, study of tissue sections, that is detecting antigens or proteins stained with labeled antibodies, is the simple definition or principle of immunohistochemistry. Now the fundamentals is that, now if you divide the principle, you can just make this into four important elements. The first one being use of antibodies, which will go and bind to specific tissue antigens, but this antibody we cannot recognize. So this has to be tagged. And the principle behind this is simple antigen antibody reaction, but the antibody will be tagged to some kind of enzyme which will convert a substance into a more colored substance that can be recognized, or a fluorescent dye or a colloidal gold that can be recognized. And this will be visualized and analyzed under the light microscopy. So these are the four essential steps which will be elaborated in detail in the demonstration. Now going further, very basics about this immunohistochemistry. If you understand the basics and also how it evolved, that will make our understanding of the concepts and the principles behind the usage of various steps of immunohistochemistry. If you take up this antigen antibody complex, and you can see that the antibody may not combine to the entire length of the antibody. So it is a specific portion of the antigen which binds to the antibody. So this portion of the antigen, which is immunogenic, is referred as epitope. However, antibody is quite big, as you can see. It has 4 polypeptide chains, 2 heavy and 2 light chains. It has a variable region and constant region. It's a variable region which determines a particular class of antibodies, and there are 5 major classes of antibodies you can see: IgG, IgM, IgA, IgD, and IgE. If you take up, most of the antibodies that are used in immunohistochemistry will be the IgG class, because that is the major class of immunoglobulin produced in our body and released into the serum. Now, the strength of this bondage between antigen and antibody is referred to as affinity. So those antibodies which have got high affinity, you can use in lesser quantity or higher dilution, and they will be, the bondage will be more stable. So that is the concept of using dilution, pre-dilution, other things which will be explained later. Now, one more important thing is this bondage or the strength of the antigen antibody reaction, also the rate of antigen antibody reaction, is affected by many factors. Among them, important being the temperature, pH of the diluents which are used, which will be stressed later also during the talk. Now, coming to antibodies, it can be broadly classified into 2 broad categories: polyclonal or monoclonal. Polyclonal means an antibody which can bind to many epitopes of an antigen. You know that an antigen is quite a big length of polypeptide which has different epitopes. So only one epitope may be bound to an antibody, or multiple epitopes can bind. So polyclonal is capable of binding to multiple epitopes, and they may be produced by different B lymphocytes or plasma cells. Okay. So monoclonal, on the contrary, binds to only single epitope. That means it is produced by a single class of B cells or the plasma cells. Now, polyclonal antibodies have some advantages. That is, since there are many epitopes, it can recognize the antigen much better. If you use only antibodies against one epitope, if that epitope is not exposed, we may miss that antigen. So polyclonal antibodies, the sensitivity is little better, and it can be of great use, especially in difficult antigens which are difficult to detect. But the problem is, since it can bind to many epitopes, there is always risk of background staining. Now, coming to monoclonal antibodies, this disadvantage of background staining on polyclonal antibodies is overcome by monoclonal antibodies. But only problem is it will bind to only single epitope, so we may miss many times. So sensitivity may come down. Now, antibodies, you know that they are colorless. We cannot recognize on simple microscopy, so it has to be labeled. You need some kind of color reaction, some kind of detection system to recognize this antigen antibody reaction. So the most important labels being fluorochromes, where fluorescent dye is used, but for this you need to use fluorescent microscope. So it is not that stable. Over a period, exposure to light will fade it. So it is not so easy. It may become a little expensive also. On the contrary, we can use stable enzymes which will convert a substance into a colored end product, and that can be picked up. So these are the enzymes. This is actually the chemistry here. Peroxidase or alkaline phosphatase are the popular enzymes which are used. The advantage is it is quite stable, does not fade, and it is cheaper. You don't have to use any special microscope for this. You can simple light microscope is enough. And the chromogens, especially for peroxidase, which are needed for this, would be 3,3-diaminobenzidine, that is the DAP, or you can use AEC amino 9-ethyl carbazole. Now, this is what I was telling you about monoclonal antibodies. These antibodies bind to one epitope, one particular epitope. And if you take a polyclonal antibodies, they can bind to different epitopes in an antigen, in a protein. Now, how did IHC evolve further? You know that in any scientific situation, it evolves over a period because the scientists or the technologists who are working on that will recognize that this particular procedure may be having some disadvantages, and over a period it gets modified, becomes more evolved. So though these steps are not, the previous methods are obsolete, it is better to understand this because it will give a concept which will understand the principles behind the modified procedure which we follow at present. So if you take up the first method, if you take up the simple principle of antigen antibody reaction, same thing applies to the procedure of IHC, where an antigen is present and you apply an antibody which is tagged with an enzyme. And for this, you have to add a chromogen, which end product is a colored product, which will be recognized on light microscopy. So this is a simple, direct one step. This is the initial method of IHC which was followed, but it had few disadvantages. The thing is that for one antigen, you're using only one antibody. So you had to use a lot of antibodies to improve the amplification or to improve the signal. So, and it was short and quick advantage, but it had a disadvantage of being requirement of higher concentration of antibodies. It was less sensitive because the amplification signal used to be very, very weak. So to improve the signal, two steps came. That is, an antigen was made to bind to an antibody, that is primary antibody. But this primary antibody was again, there was a second antibody which will bind to this primary antibody. That means to say secondary antibody will be raised against the primary antibody. This secondary antibody will be carrying the enzyme. So you can add multiple antibodies can bind to this, and that's how the signal amplification will happen. So two-step method, increase the steps, but increase the end result. The sensitivity increased. Now, this secondary antibody is better to be conjugated, not the primary antibody, because of these advantages. See, if you go on binding every primary antibody with the labeling or conjugate, you have to use a wide number of antibodies, and conjugation of each of these primary antibodies would turn out to be very expensive. So if you just go on binding the secondary antibodies, which is general against many primary antibodies, just against particular species, so the rate, the expense will come down. Then signal amplification will be much better if you use secondary antibody as the tagging molecule. And you can use higher working dilution for primary antibody. You don't have to worry. For signal amplification, you have to use more primary antibody. Instead of that, use secondary antibody that will be of less expenses. Now, to this double step came one more step referred to as sandwich method, or the three steps, because see this, you have a antigen. To this primary antibody will be bound. Next comes secondary antibody against the primary antibody. Now you can make this particular secondary antibody bound to an enzyme. And now you use a complex referred to as a antibody against this enzyme or an antibody against this secondary antibody, something like a third step. So this complex will act as a third step and the three-step method. So here, not only the secondary antibody carries the enzyme, even the secondary antibody will also, that is the tertiary antibody also carries the enzyme. So it improves the amplification. And one more thing, what happens, you can use a complex, like for example, if you have used an enzyme, which acts as a chromogen converting enzyme, you can use an antibody against this enzyme. This will act as a complex one carrying many enzyme surfaces. So basically what it is aiming is that it is trying to improve the quantity of the signal change, quantity of the enzyme and at that particular bondage or the bind antigen antibody reaction. So the end result will be a very amplified signal. So you can use these two complexes, which acts as actually a kind of bridge or a sandwich, that is a combination of peroxidase, antiperoxidase, or alkaline phosphatase, anti-alkaline phosphatase. So to give example like this, you have a primary antibody here, sorry, antigen with primary antibody. Then you have a secondary antibody. Now you see this complex. This is the sandwich here. That is against an enzyme, you have an anti-enzyme, which is also a protein. So many enzyme surfaces are there where the reaction is not affected, only the complex develops. So the number of enzymes carried by this particular sandwich or the third molecule would be more. So the signal change would be much better. You can further increase where you can develop one more antibody against this, carrying more and more enzymes. So the secondary antibody will carry enzymes, third, tertiary, and quaternary, all these carry enzymes. So the amplification will be more. That's what it says here. So bridging antibody can be at a second level or tertiary level, making it either 3-step or 4-step. Now going to further, it was modified. We wanted much more stronger proteins. So then came this particular sandwich was actually a complex of biotin and avidin, this complex combination of protein and its corresponding binding protein. So this was a sandwich which carried many enzymes. But problem with this was that inherently our tissue contained biotin. So that was giving some non-specific reaction. See, this is what used to happen. It improved the amplification. The problem what happened was there was endogenous biotin which was compromising it. Then there was lectin which was binding with avidin. And the bondage between biotin and avidin was little weak, so it used to get diluted and give some problems. So further evolution happened where instead of avidin, streptavidin was used, which had a very stronger bondage. And now comes, this is what the sandwich, which carries multiple enzymes, which has improved the signal amplification. And it has overcome the non-specific binding to lectin and non-specific binding of biotin, endogenous biotin also. So this became more stable and the reaction was much better. So the evolution came from the single step to double step or the indirect step to tertiary 3-step, then the sandwich method. And now we have come to the latest one, that is the polymer based. This polymer based, why it was used? Because if you take up this sandwich method, it was involving multiple steps, too many to secondary, tertiary, like that. It was going on so many enzymes. So instead of that, to reduce the number of steps, this polymer based was used, where this primary antibody was bound to a polymer which carried not only the secondary antibody, but also it carried the enzymes or the labeling substance. So this secondary antibody was actually bound to this polymer, which is a dextran polymer. And this was carrying a large number of antibodies and large number of enzymes. So the amplification was much better. You don't have to add secondary, tertiary, all those things. Simple secondary antibody containing this polymer you can add. But only issue is this, some of these dextran antibodies used to be very thicker and denser, which was not penetrating the tissue well. So much more modification happened. Now we are getting very delicate, thin dextran polymers or polypeptide polymers, which are much more delicate. Penetration is much better. So which has improved the specificity, sensitivity, and also reaction being very faster. And that has increased the amount of enzymes which can be carried here. And that can carry almost 20 secondary antibodies and 100 enzyme molecules. That's how the reaction is much faster. The amplification and the result is also much more good. So this has increased, just 2-step is enough. You don't have to add multiple antibodies here, just a single primary antibody step and then the secondary antibody, which is nothing but the polymer based. And also it has reduced the background and non-specific chain because it specifically attaches it. But only issue is it is expensive, but it has much more advantages which can overcome the expenses or the cost. Now, further, the IHC has evolved. It has become more automated because it has to improve. We have to be better in our turnaround time and to overcome some of the errors like labeling errors, transcription errors. So barcoding is there with availability is there with automation, tracking is better, traceability is better. Antigen retrieval will be uniform. So there is no kind of fluctuation of temperature, all those things. There is uniform washing, control of temperature, exposure to reagent. Liquid cover slip is used, which will be explained later, which will prevent drying artifact, uniform spreading of antibody. There is no variation in the way it is put or placed over the sections. Mixing of this antibody occurs, uniform end-to-end mixing and spread will happen. This is very useful, especially when there is high workload. And also this has gone further where we can demonstrate more than one antibody at a single sitting. That is one nuclear, one cytoplasmic membranous, or even nuclear being two because of two different chromogens being used. And this is the automated IH system. Many companies are available. We cannot mention that, but it's available in the net. You can approach them. But one mention about the kind of usage of antibodies in these automated instruments. It can be open type or a closed type. What do you mean by open type? It means that primary antibody you can use of any choice, not only from the company where you purchase this instrument, but you can buy from any vendor. But some of these instruments are closed for secondary antibodies. Means you have to buy from that particular company which gives the equipment, or some of them are closed systems where primary and secondary you have to buy from them. So you have to kind of gauge your requirements and accordingly act, and the cost difference will also be there. So this is the end of the principle, and now I request Emma Madam to discuss the practice of it, and after that we'll have the video demonstration. Over to Madam. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandish. Yeah, immunohistochemistry in practice. First and foremost thing, we go in for a sample. What kind of a samples are good for IHC, required for IHC? Frozen section, paraffin sections, cytology, smears, and decalcified sections. And simple immunohistochemistry in simple practice, this is just a principle of the procedure, how you go about it. Formalin fixed paraffin embedded tissue is taken, and it is blocked with an endogenous enzyme activity and antigen retrieval because of formalin fixed, which undergoes several procedures of processing. You require to do the antigen retrieval part of it, blocking with normal serum, and then goes to blocking with normal serum for non-specific bindings, and then comes to the primary antibody, then comes the bridge antibody that can be called as a link antibody, secondary antibody with enzyme complex, and then comes the substrate chromogen. DAB is a permanent chromogen used for color. During the process of formalin fixation, many antigenic sites are masked. Therefore, sometimes it's difficult or impossible to stain without antigen retrieval. So it needs unmasking of antigen, enhancement of staining. Antigen retrieval is a process of treating formalin fixed paraffin embedded tissue sections with proteolytic enzymes or heating them in various buffers in order to expose the antigen. Commonly used proteolytic enzymes include trypsin, pepsin, and protease. So proteolytic enzyme digestion is one method. Microwave antigen retrieval is the second method. Pressure cooker retrieval is the third method, which is most commonly welcomed. Heating to high temperature in citrate buffers reduces the linkage caused by formalin, while primary structure of the protein is not affected. Factor influencing the antigen retrieval is temperature, heating time, and pH value of the solution. pH value makes a very important role. Heat treatment microwaving involves boiling of dewaxed formalin fixed sections in various solutions. Pressure cooking is more number of slides can be processed, shorter time, more consistent antigen retrieval. In microwaving, sometimes the tissue, the level of the buffer goes down. So you have to be continuously monitoring whether the buffer level is maintained or not. When it comes to the pressure cooking, the buffer, there is no drying artifacts. Requires buffer of different concentration of pH. Commonly used buffers include citrate buffer pH 6, tris EDTA pH 9, EDTA buffer pH 8, tris HCl is under pH 10. Primary antibody selection. This refers to the antibody that is directed against the antigen of interest. For example, CD20 can be used as the primary antibody to demonstrate B cell on a tissue section. Both polyclonal and monoclonal antibodies can be used as primaries. They are typically supplied by manufacturers in two formats, that is concentrated and ready to use. Concentrated, we make our own dilutions. Ready to use, they are doing the dilution for us. Selection of primary antibody. First and foremost thing is what type of antibody you require for your interest. That is, and then when you go for a selection of primary antibody, the company should be FDA cleared. FDA cleared means your antibody is already tested and validated by the institution. Then it comes out to the market, and you have a data sheet from the company. Data sheet from the company should be having all these details in detailed information. Source of antibody, that is whether your antibody is raised in mouse, rabbit, goat, or human. Polyclonal or monoclonal. Suitable for IHC, paraffin, and frozen section. Whether it contains the correct clone, because many of the dealers, they instead of monoclonal, they would have supplied you polyclonal or a different clone. So you have to check for the correct clone. Sensitivity and specificity of the antibody, protein concentration of the antibody, recommended dilution, and recommended antigen retrieval method also. Then for least but not is the storage, which makes a very important role in storing the antibody, because many of the antibody requires -70, -20 and -70, and most of them at 4 degrees. And read the relevant literature before you place an order to the antibody. Blocking. Endogenous peroxidase activity, pre-treatment of the tissue section with hydrogen peroxide. Tissue contains rich in RBCs, because most of our material are surgical biopsies. So these surgical biopsies will have blood, and endogenous protein is present in blood all over. And our chromogen used is DAB. So when you are using chromogen as DAB, the RBCs will take up the staining. So the necessity for blocking the endogenous peroxidase activity is necessary, and it needs to be blocked to prevent background staining. Endogenous biotin pretreatment of unconjugated avidin. If using ABC technique, biotin needs to be blocked. Non-specific binding of an antibody can also occur to tissue component bearing negative charges. Example, collagen can be blocked by pretreatment with antisera of a normal animal tissue of the same species or commercially available protein block. And simple technique is skim milk powder, which can be used as a universal blocker. Application of IHC is for diagnosis, validate, and it helps in validate and confirm a morphological judgment, therapeutic decision making, prognosis, invasion, metastasis, cell proliferation, demonstration of tissue component. Message: immunohistochemistry is an essential ancillary technique in histopathology. One of the most powerful technique in surgical pathology, used judicially the information obtained from a tissue. Individualized approach work best. Cost effectiveness and quality control need to be monitored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful session and introduction into the principles and practice of immunohistochemistry. Now, coming up is a short video demonstration of the IHC procedure. Can we play the video, please?
Immunohistochemistry is a technique of detecting specific proteins in tissue sections by using the principle of antigen-antibody reaction with suitable enzymes and substrates, which forms thick insoluble precipitates that can be visualized under light microscope. Collect 4 micron thick formalin-fixed paraffin sections on positively charged slides. The sections need to be fixed by heat, hence slides should be placed on the slide warmer for 1 hour at 58 degree to 60 degree Celsius. Using positively charged slides and heat fixation are important to prevent sections from floating. The instruments required are measuring balance, magnetic stirrer, pH meter, pressure cooker with hot plate, or microwave oven. Reagents used are phosphate buffer saline, tris buffer saline, which are used as wash buffers, antigen retrieval buffers, which include citrate or tris EDTA buffer. The first step is preparation of tris buffer. To make tris buffer, weigh 6.05 gram of tris base and 8.7 gram of sodium chloride. Add both to 1 liter of distilled water. Place on the magnetic stirrer for complete mixing for about 30 minutes. Then adjust the pH to 7.4 to 7.6 by using 1 normal HCl. We have arranged the reagents in the order required for staining. The first step is De-Paraphilization. Place the slides in xylene for dewaxing for 5 minutes, 2 changes each. This is followed by rehydration in graded alcohol from 100%, 90%, 70% and distilled water for 3 minutes each.
De-Paraphilization is the most critical step. If this step is not performed properly, staining quality will not work.
Next important step is endogenous peroxidase blocking in freshly prepared 3% H2O2 in methanol for 20 to 30 minutes. Wash the slides in distilled water for 5 minutes and in TBS for 5 minutes. Remember to use fresh tris buffer every time.
This step of endogenous peroxidase block is very important. Make sure methanol H2O2 is freshly prepared for each use. If not, it will affect the staining quality and interpretation as all RBCs will be positive.
The next important step is antigen retrieval. For this, preheat the tris EDTA buffer at 800 watts for 5 minutes. Then insert the slides and microwave in 2 cycles. In the first cycle, adjust the microwave for required power at 600 watts for 10 minutes. In the second cycle, adjust the microwave for the required power at 450 watts for 5 minutes. Cool the slides to room temperature for about 30 minutes.
Antigen retrievals varies depending on the antibody used. For example, nuclear antigen like ER-PR mid requires high temperature and increased time. In microwave, we have to be very careful to make sure the buffer level does not fall, which can cause section drying. Use of pressure cooker has its advantages. The sections do not float or dry.
The next step is protein block, which is important for preventing background staining. For this, we use freshly prepared 300 mg of skimmed milk powder dissolved in 10 ml of TBS. Leave this for 30 minutes for it to completely dissolve. It's good to prepare 30 minutes before using. Place the slides in humid chamber in order to prevent drying artifact. Apply protein block for 30 minutes.
This step of protein block is very important to prevent non-specific background staining. Several products are available like goat serum and commercial blockers. Simple technique is to use is 3% milk powder, but make sure it is freshly prepared. It has to be completely dissolved, which may take up to 30 minutes. It is also good to filter it before use.
Wash the slides in TBS for 2 minutes, 2 changes each. The next step is preparation of primary antibody. Today, we are using GFAP antibody at 1:600 dilution. For this, I'm taking 600 microliter of TBS. To this, I will add 1 microliter of GFAP for 1:600 dilution and mix well. Once the antibodies are ready, wipe the slides around the sections in order to remove excess buffer.
Humid chamber plays a very important role in preventing drying artifacts. A thin layer of moist cotton is placed in the chamber. Drying artifacts give false positive and background staining.
Apply primary antibody on the sections and incubation period is 1 hour. For ready-to-use antibodies, the antibodies can be directly put on the sections.
Dilution varies from antibody to antibody. We have given two commonly used antibody, GFAP 1 in 600 and synaptophysin ready to use. Incubation period varies from antibody to antibody from 1 hour to overnight. You can check the data sheet for dilution and incubation period and standardize it based on the staining quality. One thing to remember when you are applying primary antibody, make sure the entire section is covered and there are no air bubbles.
After incubation, wash the slides in test buffer for 5 minutes. 2 changes. Wipe the slides around the sections in order to remove excess buffer. Apply secondary antibody as per the company protocol. We are using DACO Envision kit. Incubate for 1 hour. Wash the slides in TBS for 5 minutes. 2 changes. Leave the slides in test buffer while you prepare the chromogen. The chromogen should be prepared fresh as per the company protocol. Take 1 ml of substrate buffer, add 20 microliter of DAB solution. Wipe the slides around the sections in order to remove excess buffer. Apply this freshly prepared solution on the slides and incubate for 1 to 3 minutes. You can see color development when added.
When you make DAB chromogen, prepare the solution in the dark vial and incubate in the dark chamber because DAB reacts with light and precipitate may be formed on the sections. Here we are showing it in the light for video purpose.
Now wash slides in TBS followed by distilled water to stop the reaction. Place the slides in running tap water. Counterstain in Mayer's hematoxylin. Wash the slides under running tap water. Dehydrate in graded alcohol from 70%, 90% and 100%. Clear in xylene. And mount in DPX. The slides are now ready to be weaved.
I hope the video demonstration was very useful to all the audience out there. Now, I would once again like to invite Dr. Nandish for the next session, IHC Pearls Quality Control.
Thank you, Dr. Mufina. Is the slide visible?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll be discussing about one important aspect of the procedure of immunohistochemistry, that is the quality management. Now, quality, what is quality? In general understanding, a service or a product which is free from defects and deficiencies is referred to as a product or service of good quality. So when a product or service that fulfills the defined or the expected requirement, it is said to meet the quality requirements. But from a medical laboratory point of view, quality to be translated into the practice, it refers to providing accurate, timely, reliable, and reproducible results. But at the same time, it has to be cost effective. So quality is a measure or a degree of excellence or practice, good practice. Now, to start with the introduction, the aim of immunohistochemistry is to demonstrate the antigens with minimum background staining, at the same time preserving the integrity of tissue architecture. So the fundamental measure in this particular aspect of IHC is that those antigens which has to be demonstrated, that is antigen of interest when present, has to be detected. That means sensitivity. Those which are negative should not be stained at all. So that as the antigen, when it is absent, it should not be stained. That is, it has to be specific to that particular antigen. So this sensitivity and specificity indirectly indicates how well the technique is done, and any alteration in this will indicate that we are deviating. And all these results should be reproducible and it should be consistent. But if you see, a laboratory cycle is not simple. It is very complex. It has multiple steps, which ranges right from the time a tissue is biopsied and until the report is dispatched. Everything matters here. So there are many factors which can affect the immunohistochemistry result. We'll kind of discuss about that. Now, quality management, whether it is in IHC or anything, it indicates that it covers the practice of continuously assessing and adjusting the performance using scientifically accepted procedure. This is actually a definition from one of the accreditation body, that is College of American Pathologists. Basically, quality management aims at providing zero defects and accurate results. Now, this covers some important elements. Among them, the first one being the quality control, which is like if you take up a vehicle, maintenance of a vehicle, every day when we take out the vehicle, we check for the petrol, we check whether it is starting like that. So that day, that minimal checks which we do for each ride, that is referred to as a kind of quality control. So basically it applies to detection of errors and defects in testing process. That is basically at the analytical level. Now, when it comes to a broader way, that is where you maintain your vehicle by regular service, change of oil, getting regularly checkup, all those things refers to quality assurance, regular washing, all those things. It's a much broader, which covers many steps of the laboratory cycle. So quality assurance is a step which is taken, it's a wider step which is taken to recognize errors, preventing the errors, correcting the errors or defects in the entire process, not just analytical, pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical. So in simple terms, quality assurance includes quality control, and it ensures or assures a specified quality is achieved and maintained. So it emphasizes many aspects. And so in simple terms, what you can tell is quality assurance is a combination of quality control plus many other procedures, in one of them being external quality assurance program, participating in external quality assurance program. Now, so it is like this: quality control, which is part of quality assurance. Quality assurance is a broader one, which covers many processes and products. And when you take care of even devising or making policies and maintaining it, then it becomes a total quality management. This is not applicable only to IHC, it's applicable to entire laboratory cycle. And over that, you should know that whether your vehicle is coming to reserve or any problem is there, some kind of indicator. So that quality indicator also you have to keep in the mind and monitor it. So what is the basic requirement where we can deviate from the expected quality or expected result? Now, the basic essential thing is that we need to have a well-fixed, well-processed, and high-quality paraffin sections for immunohistochemistry. So this simple the simple paraffin section can be affected many steps, as you know. So that simple basic procedure itself has to be standardized and monitored. Follow the SOP properly. Fixation, very important. We may think that we may use even under fixation is also dangerous, not good. Over fixation is not good. So optimum fixation, many people ask, Depends on the size of the tissue. Generally, if it is very small, something like endoscopic biopsies, you can take even 5 hours is enough, but minimum 5 hours it should be there, or up to 24 hours is good. Most of the tissues, it should not be beyond 48 hours. Now, people may use the best fixative, which fixative like that, but overall, if you take buffer, neutral buffer formalin is best of 10% strength. But sometimes we use the best fixative and proper time. The problem is there will be delay in fixation. That means to say, after surgery, they may not have placed the tissue in the formalin. That causes autolysis or degradation of the proteins, what is referred as ischemia or cold ischemia. That especially affects prognostic markers like ERPR. One has to be very careful. That's the reason I was telling the factors start right from the time a biopsy procedure is started. Next is tissue processing. These two have to be adequate and appropriate. Then paraffinization should be adequate and uniform. All pre-treatment procedures like that is antigen retrieval, all those things has to be good. Microtomy, thickness, it should be of nominal thickness, sorry. If it is more thick, more background staining, overlap, artifacts, crushing, all those things causes a lot of background staining. Decalcification. Many of the decalcification acids, especially these nitric acid, all those things which we use at strength of 10-15%, can be lethal. Best is to use weak acids, that is formic acid based. Buffers, no shortcuts, it should be freshly prepared, maintain the pH. Never ever, during the procedure, don't dry the slides, especially when we are using for buffers or antibodies or anything. But where it is expected to be dried, then it has to be adequately dried. I already mentioned about antigen retrieval. Blocking procedure, very essential. If they're properly or adequately and optimally not blocked, we get a lot of background staining, non-specific staining. And primary and secondary antibodies, to choose the right primary, right secondary, dilute it properly, store it properly, and chromogen also adequate timing, adequate dilution, and most importantly are the usage of controls. Now, overall, if you see, so many steps are there, but literature and also experience says that the two important crucial factors which affect IHC results are simple fixation and processing. So those are the two essential things which may not be related to IHC directly, but for any step and special stains, these two are the vital steps. For quality control, as I mentioned to you, it is a step or a measure which is done to monitor day-to-day operations. So it basically monitors for any errors, consistency of the performance, and whether we can reproduce the result what is expected. Or anything which is deviating, you have to recognize the root cause of it and appropriate corrective action has to be taken. Now, quality control, to kind of monitor this, you need to use two important controls. One is positive, which will give positive reaction, and negative. Now, any deviation in this positive negative control, when the results are not optimal, that is where you expect positivity, it should be positive, where you expect negative, it should be negative. If it deviates from that, then the entire process of IHC becomes invalid. Now, why you should use controls? It is basically to check or test or validate IHC staining results. It is basically, it will identify the problems related to not only the procedure, but also the reagent strength, the test, and other essential component steps of the procedure. And it also helps in early detection of any change or weakness of the result or decreased sensitivity and altered specificity like that. So if you follow this control, it is a kind of indirect guarantee that and kind of assurance that procedure is followed properly, reagents are kit components are in good working condition like that. For that, you have to use essentially positive control, positive tissue control. That means where tissue contains the expected antigens and you expect a positive reaction. So this measures not only the strength of the antigens and the reagent quality, but also the procedure. At the same time, you may have to use negative control. One is negative tissue control. That means tissue do not contain the antigens and it should not show any positive reaction. If it shows, that means it is non-specific. And next is negative reagent control. This is only to test for reagent strength or weakening or some alteration. So you just have to skip the primary antibody or substitute the primary antibody with any other components like buffer, serum, like that. One more thing is sometimes some of the tissue contains internal control. That is, normal elements will be there, which can be demonstrated by the IHC, but that may be present or that may be absent or that may be altered in the tumor, so that can be used as a comparison. Whatever it is, optimum positive internal control is very, very important and a very essential quality check and a quality control. And one more important thing to test for good fixation processing is this one. There is a quality control used for processing. An indicator for testing the processing would be Vimentic, which helps in assessing the fixation alteration. Now, little more about controls, that is positive and negative control. Whatever tissue you choose, you have to carefully choose these controls, not vaguely choosing it. You have to select and how it reacts, that has to be tested, and preferably it has to be placed in the same slide or different slide, but it has to be subjected to the same procedure, same pre-treatment and immunohistochemistry staining protocol. Some people prefer to stain it in the same section, but if the section is too large, it may be difficult to accommodate. But nevertheless, for any kind of antibody you are using it, you need to use one positive control for that. And what about internal positive control? Sometimes you may not, you don't have to depend on external positive control, internal positive control will be there, but still it's always better to choose a tumor or a known case which has positive and not depend on normal tissue, because there will be some difference between the way a normal tissue reacts from a tumor. As I mentioned, positive tissue control is very essential. If it is not satisfactory, then it will be invalid. Some of them, what they do is, for ease of work, they cut the control block and keep the slides for a longer time. But one should remember that this is not a good practice, because once you cut and keep it, expose it to air and other things, temperature variation, it will destabilize the antigens and you may not get the adequate result. And negative control is always good, especially for infective conditions, all those things. But many of the guidelines, including some of the accreditation body itself, what they don't insist on negative control, because you know that in a tissue, some antigens are expected to be negative. When they are negative, that itself indicates as a negative control. So they're not stressing on that. Practically, positive control itself, if you follow positive control, that's more than enough, because we are a resource poor country. We have to save on reagents. So negative control can be to some extent kept aside. Now, what do you mean by validation? In a simple dictionary terminology, validation means the act of confirming something as true or correct. That means you have to test for its correctness or trueness. So any lab procedure, what you are doing, requires validation. So this includes two elements, testing and verification. Testing is when you are first time procuring that, you have to test it. Or when you have modified something or you have changed something, then you have to verify it. It's like that. So it combines both. So when do you have to validate? Whenever when you procure antibodies for the first time or any reagents, so you have to standardize. Next, when you change a batch or a lot, you have to test for that. You validate this. But when you're testing this lot to lot or batch to batch variation, you have to compare with the older staining pattern, older SOP you follow, older antibody what you have done, compare it with that. So any new course, due to various inputs, review or some kind of continual improvement or CME program or workshop, whatever new inputs you get, you may have changed the SOP. Again, you have to revalidate it whether it is really working in your lab or not. So, and expert antibodies also, if you want to use, if they are expensive and you cannot afford, you may have to revalidate it. Now, for validation, whether it's the first time or second time or verification like that, you have to use at least 2 to 3 positive controls and 1 negative control. And this is the format which we follow in our lab. That is, you have to test for intensity and specificity. And then you have to titrate it. In the sense, your company would have recommended one dilution, when that dilution may not work in your lab because of various factors. So you have to use at least 3 dilutions, 1 company recommendation and 1 dilution on either side of it. 1 excess and 1 lower and higher level of dilution. Now, coming to quality assurance, after discussing about quality control, now there are some more things which will ensure that we are much better than the daily testing of the analysis or daily analysis. Then we are much more broader and we are looking after quality monitoring. So that includes quality control. Some people call it as internal quality control because we do internally in the laboratory. Another one is participation in external quality assurance programs and some other things which I'll tell you at the policy level. So quality assurance, how we can ensure, like better training, better expertise, repeated training, like that, regular competency assessment, daily and periodic review of our work, our SOP reviewing that, use of good quality, well-characterized reagents, appropriate antibody titer, retrieval methods, incubation, validation of each antibody, calibration of instruments if you are using automated and other things, other pH like that, pH meter like that, and most importantly, participation in external quality assurance programs and regularly participating in proficiency test. Proficiency is basically a test of our expertise. Without our knowledge, what happens? We become complacent and our efficiency may be coming down. So it's always good to participate in regular proficiency testing, even if you are becoming seniors. Now, there are many quality assurance programs which you can participate. The most popular being the College of American Pathologists. Since our institute here, our service department services are a little unique, neuropathology, we have program only from UK, so we are participating in this UK NECPAS. There are other Nordic. From India, TMH is actually conducting this program, especially for breast tumor markers. And one most importantly is that many of them actually ask for send unstained slates, and they ask us to stain, but that will not test the pre-analytical factors. It tests only the analytical part, so that may not be complete. So best is this UPN-Aquas program, which actually asks us to send the entire ISC. Not only they send unstained slate, we have to send our section also. So that gives a much more wider analysis. And most importantly is audit. If you're participating in any of the audit program or accreditation program, whatever inputs you give there, that's a very good assurance program. So one thing about quality indicator is it's like indicating that your vehicle is going to reserve or some kind of problem is there in the engine, something like that, heating problem like that. So you have to monitor. This quality indicator acts as an important flag or tool for monitoring. So one of the two best things what you can do for immunohistochemistry would be how many times you have redone it or repeated it, and what is the turnaround time. All these things indicates, and expense calculation. So these two are important quality indicators which you can consider. And most importantly is the result or the performance in Aquas programs. And never forget the results what you get. Suppose if you think that some of the Aquas programs are expensive, all those things, still you can follow an internal one, or you can compare with other laboratory, inter-laboratory comparison, or you yourself can assess by like some senior technician or a senior professor, faculty can assess this like what we do in our lab. So you can not only be participating in the external one, we have an internal assessment program also where we do like this, 4 assessors, 2 faculty and 2 technicians. They look for the specificity and sensitivity of the reaction, intensity, uneven staining, background staining, how it is counter stain, everything, and accordingly marked and action taken. Not only that, every now and then we need to have an internal review and audit and work on that. Lastly is documentation record. Whatever activity you do, it has to be recorded, especially ranging from the antigen, the antibodies or the chemicals or consumers which you procure, their details, their validation or the action performed on that. And most importantly, the daily QC, what you do, the internal positive control, what you run among them, and how the staining is coming out, log sheets, whether you can maintain physical form or electronic form. And when you recognize false positive and false negative every day, and accordingly you look for, take the corrective action, analyze the root cause, make the preventive action, create some kind of device of preventive action, and all the troubleshooting issues has to be documented in daily QC, and regularly you have to review it. And Aquas details has to be recorded, and NABL recommends that all the QC rated records has to be maintained at least for 2 years, and it has to be meticulously maintained because it will act as an excellent quality assurance tool and a proof. And most importantly, it will act as a tool for training and education internally and externally. Lastly, after implementing all these things, it does not ensure that your laboratory will never commit any errors. It may still happen, but one thing is it will not be that excess and that will not be that major. So it helps in detecting error that may occur and prevent them from recurring it. So lastly, the concluding remarks would be like this. Whenever you are selecting reagents or antibodies, review properly and take opinions. Always fresh reagents has to be prepared where it has to be prepared. Don't compromise, no shortcuts. Be careful about all the factors that can affect, right from the pre-analytical to post-analytical. Strictly adhere to the SOP. And if the resources support, you can upgrade to automation. Maintain good quality control. Establish a good internal quality control mechanism. Focus on continual improvement. Enroll into external quality programs. And these two, especially the quality assurance and QC, are powerful quality management systems or procedures which you have to follow. And thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful, thorough, and meticulous methodical approach to quality management in IHC practice, sir. Now, next up is the eagerly awaited panel discussion on the practical issues and troubleshooting in IHC. Our senior neuropathology faculty, Dr. Vani Santosh and Dr. Yasha are also present online. I would like to invite Mrs. Hemavati, Mr. Shivraju, and Mr. Shiv Shankar for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nufina. And I thank the panelists, our dear colleagues, seniors, the pillars of our department, Emma Madam, Shivraju, and Shivshankar. We have a set of important questions for the panel discussion. These are like frequently asked questions, the day-to-day doubts which we come across, and many trainees who have come here, they frequently ask these questions. So these questions have been devised on the requirement of them and then the daily requirement of it. And this may not cover all the important doubts which you may have got. So whatever is not covered, please feel free to type it in the chat box, and accordingly we will take it up in the next session, that is the open Q&A session. So we'll now start with the most important questions which we thought has to be discussed importantly. And these are, as I mentioned, are the important questions raised by many of the trainees who had come here, and we feel that these are the FAQs of this IHC. The first question is about the choice of antibodies. May I request Hema Madam to tell us about how to choose antibodies, like how to select the company or the antibodies. What is the methodology you follow?
First and foremost thing is we should know what is our requirement. What is our requirement? Yeah, first and foremost thing, we should be aware what antibody you require for what type of work. So you have to go through the literature and find out yourself that what type of requirement you have. And then you have to choose the antibodies according to the company. The company should be FDA cleared. FDA cleared means that your antibody is already tested and it should be working anywhere with any secondary antibody you use, not pertaining to their own company secondary. So all these things need to be counted first. And secondly is when you place an order, you ensure that you get a data sheet from the company, and data sheet company, and then you look for the instruments, look for the details of the antibodies. Details of the antibody is source of antibody, from where it is raised, whether it is mouse, rabbit, or goat, or human. And accordingly, you have to select the secondary also. So secondary will be anti-mouse, anti-goat, anti-rabbit will be your secondary. And so and what type of a blocking, the protein block you'll be using for these. So accordingly, you have to choose the antibody what you're buying. And the clone makes a very important. There are in antibodies, there are different clones. Not all will be suitable to your diagnosis. So you all are not suitable for your diagnosis. So you have to look into the specific clone, what you require. And then you have to also ensure that they have given the dilution and the retrieval method suitable for, and whether it is suitable for paraffin or frozen. And some antibodies, they come only for Western blots. So you be careful when you are buying it for paraffin embedded sections or a frozen section. And storage details. Storage details is some antibody requires -20 and -70 also. And most of our antibodies are 4 degrees centigrade. It is stored at 4 degrees centigrade. And check the relevant literature whether all these things fits into it.
Thank you. That was a good answer. Now, coming to the next question, actually, this is a day-to-day problem which we face with regard to the reporting and interpretation. That is, we come across many times very weak staining, kind of incomplete staining, non-uniform or very weak. And how to address this? What may be the cause, Mr. Shivraj?
There are many reasons for weak staining. For example, improper fixation. Fixation is the main important in histopathological these things. Usually, a 10% buffer permanent is preferable for the fixation. If it is not fixed properly, the staining will affect it. And another thing is improper processing. Regular changes of alcohol, xylene processing method. There is that also the main causes of IHC. And another one is improper de-paraffinization. Properly de-paraffinization is good, but if it is not proper de-paraffinization, the weak staining will become. And one more thing, inadequate this thing blocking and washing and this inadequate incubation of primary antibodies and shortcuts. Some of the technicians, some shortcuts they are using. More time, less time they given. These are the main things to weak staining.
Yeah, what Shivraj says is correct. We get weak staining because of, first and foremost thing, when a specimen is not properly fixed and it is not properly processed. If it is only the edges will be processed, the center tissue will not be processed if your section is thick. So in that case, there will be ear section lifting and weak staining, patchy staining, non-specific staining, all those things comes. And fixation also has one more problem is, if you keep too longer in fixation, we also get formalin pigmentation. So fixation of formalin tissue is very, very important that you fix in adequate 10% buffered formalin and do a good processing.
Thank you, Shivraj. Now the opposite problem also we are faced, where excessive staining or background staining, non-specific staining. What are the causes and how to work?
That also several reasons are there. Firstly, there is antigen retrieval, excess of antigen retrieval, and increasing more incubation, and one more incomplete blocking and protein endogenous blocking and over blocking. Then excess chromogen, long incubation of chromosomes, and polyclonal antibodies they are using. These are the background staining and drying artifacts, drying the slides, and precipitation of protein blocking. These are the background staining.
Yeah. To avoid the background staining, mainly is, first and foremost thing, ensure your endogenous blocking is proper. Prepare the endogenous block, that is 3% H2O2 in methanol should be prepared fresh for each use, each batch of use, and that will clear your endogenous blocking. And specific, and when it comes to a non-specific protein background, you have to ensure your protein blocker. Now commercially available protein blockers are there in company to company, varies from company to company. And some of the protein blockers doesn't work. And so hence we suggest that simple technique, 3% skimmed milk powder will be the ideal thing to use for protein block. Because here, according to the primary source, what it has raised, if your primary is mouse, then goat anti-mouse. So you have to go for a normal serum, means you have to go for a normal goat serum. Here you can, with the 3% skimmed milk, you can avoid all that. You can straight away go do for any primary as a blocker and clears from your this thing. When it comes to the chromogen, dark chromogen, it has to be prepared fresh. It's a must preparation fresh, and it requires to be prepared in a dark wire and incubated also in dark chiller. Too longer a period if you incubate it, then your dab will have precipitation. And these are some of the things. If you avoid, you will get a good results.
Yeah, very good piece of information and tips actually. And now one more problem we face, that is when we are seeing HMV slides routine, the section will be good. But after IHC comes, many of the sections may have got lifted, or portion of it gets lifted. What are the causes for it and how to avoid?
That also same improper fixation and improper processing. And one more thing, this excessive heat during the retrieval time, that also the lifting of the sections. And using the ordinary slides, you have to use charged slides. That's
Yeah. Using of positively charged slides helps the sections to adhere to the slides properly, because IHC involves a high temperature retrieval. So during that high temperature retrieval, we are giving a full power and 500 watts, 600 watts, where there is a chances that section gets lifted. And one more reason for section lifting is, if your processing is not good, then also the sections will be lifted. And you can avoid that.
Thank you. Very useful information. Now, in today's video demonstration, it was manual. So, do you recommend going for automation? Any advantages?
Yeah. See, when you have larger load of sections, like now we are almost running 150 slides per day, and our working hours is only from 9 to 4:30. So imagine 150 slides running on a manual, and your quality of washing, everything, it gets hampered. Okay, so automation is recommended in that sense, because you will get uniform staining. There will be a uniform retrieval, uniform washing, and even uniform incubation time. And the temperature is maintained from end to end. And antibodies also are maintained to that temperature, whatever it is required. So we recommend automation. And in automation, there is one specific thing is, you have a liquid cover slipper. Whatever we are using, in that we just recommend for a liquid cover slipper. What is liquid cover slipper is nothing but a vegetable oil, and they have, it is with the formula of, the company doesn't decode it. It is with the combination of vegetable oil and glycerol, but it doesn't interfere with your antibody or the solution, whatever you're using there, and it just floats on top of the section. And that prevents the drying artifact. So, and another one more thing with the automation is, it has a vertile mixer. Even if your sections are quite big, from end to end, staining is possible with vertile mixer and with minimum antibody of 100 microliter. Whereas in manual, we'll be using 500 microliter for that big, our, for example, it's our brain sections, brain biopsy. We have end-to-end slide, the thickness of the size of the section goes to end-to-end. And here only 100 microliter of antibody we'll be using. Whereas when you use it in manual, it is 500 microliter of antibody. So thus you also save on antibody here. Even the secondary antibody for that matter. Manual again will take, saying here it is only 100 microliter of antibodies. Only one problem with the automation is cost effective, because per slide they are charging us quite a bit for secondary only. Plus and primary we have to bear it. Suppose if you are if you want a cost effectiveness, and if your workload is less, better to go with the manual, because it will be only 50 to 100 rupees per slide. This here it will come to 500 to 600.
Even the instruments are a bit expensive.
Yeah, instruments are expensive, but quality staining you will okay. And because of see, when you try to wash at each step, there will be a time delay. All those things are overcome in the instruments. And incubation also. Suppose you are putting in dab. If you have to take the 10 dab slides out of the staining area, one by one you will be taking. That gets precipitated very fast.
Yeah.
Okay, then all those things matters for the manual and automation. So that is how, if you are able to do, you upgrade it to automation.
Yes. Looks like.
And you can do, and turnaround time is very less.
Yeah.
Here it will take 1 full day. There you can run 2 runs
In a day.
in a day. So all these are advantages of automation. Disadvantages only cost.
Very fast. Yeah. Considering the advantages, I think automation will be always better.
Yeah.
Only thing is affordability issue. If funding is there, I think people can go.
Yes.
Sorry, I could not ask any questions to Mr. Shivshankar. I think the next 2 questions I want to ask him only. Now, many times it so happens that we get intense background staining. Intense counter staining. That is, it becomes so dark, especially it compromises the IHC result with regard to nuclear staining. It masks the nuclear staining. So, how to overcome it? What is the cause and how to overcome it?
Many labs use different types of hematoxylins. For example, Harris, Mayers, Gills, Ellis, and some other hematoxylins. First choice for counter staining IHC slides is Mayers. We can use Harris hematoxylin also. So quick dip in Harris hematoxylin followed by water wash for more than 15 minutes will give optimal counter staining. But Mayer's hematoxylin will be the first choice for optimal counter staining. But if we keep slides in running tap water for longer duration, so it will reduce excess background staining.
By chance, by mistake, if we keep in aminoxylin for a longer time and it appears to be not listening, we are not able to interpret, can we still do anything?
Yes, we can do it. We can use 1% acid alcohol. Place the slides in 1% alcohol. I mean, a quick dip in 1% acid alcohol, followed by tap water wash. It will remove excess counter staining.
Yeah.
Any suggestions for it?
Yeah. See, Mayer's hematoxylin is the optimal thing what you can use on a regular basis, but it is cost effective again. So many labs, Harris hematoxylin is routinely used. So we can use the Harris hematoxylin by giving a very quick dip and wash in running tap water immediately, which can give you the optimal staining. But when it is excess staining has taken place, and when you go back to acid alcohol, after acid alcohol, you tend to see a background, light brown background will be there on the section, which can come into interpretation level, cause an interpretation level also. So best is to avoid all that this thing. Give a quick dip in Harris hematoxylin and do a complete thorough washing in distilled water. Or you can do one more thing is you can dilute the Harris hematoxylin and use. That is also possible.
That's good. These are very essential, useful practical tips.
Yeah.
So just to mention, reiterate that each step is so important. Just even if we are good in primary antibody, second antibody, counter staining itself can affect so much the entire step. Thank you. Now, one more thing, what happens is we have procured new antibody, especially with first time new antibody. We struggle with the dilution. How to select the dilution is the question.
Check the dilution factor in the data sheet provided from the company. For example, if the company recommendation is 1:100, take non-positive control slides, 3 non-positive control slides with 1:100 dilution, 1:50, 1:100, and 1:200 dilution. Then the slides according to the protocol. See under the microscope, whichever is the best suitable dilution for our reporting or diagnosis, that can be taken as the optimal dilution factor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
See here, when you are buying the fresh antibody from a new company, even the company, whatever the FDA certificate if they hold also, it has to work in our institute. So you have to do the company protocol on one slide to check whether their antibody is working or not. That is very important. So after which you will take it for titration with the given thing. In case of the polyclonal antibody, you can go, sometimes the company would have said it works in 1 in 200, but it works in 1 in 500 and even 1 in 1000. So for example, it's like, suppose S100, what we are using is a beta S100 is polyclonal antibody. The company recommends and says it works in 1 in 200 to 500. It works in 1 in 1500 for us. So accordingly, you have to take, sometimes you may have to take 5 different step of titration. It can be 1 in 200, 1 in 500, 1 in 1000, 1 in 1500, and 1 in 1200. So that at that time, you will be able to finish off the titration. And this is specifically for polyclonal antibody. For monoclonal antibody, of course, yes, whatever Shiva Shankar said is fine. You take a to positive control and run and select the suitable antibody, suitable dilution.
Yeah, very useful information,
Yeah.
practical. Now we have some general questions, more broader types. Now if you see even my talk also, there was need for a lot of documentation, stock maintenance, everything. So what's your advice on this inventory and stock maintenance and record keeping?
Yeah, inventory is a very important thing for any IHC lab, because when you receive an antibody, you have to check on the transportation, how it has arrived. If it is not arrived at cold condition, it might be out in room temperature in the airport or in the transportation for a long time. All the rice pack would have melted, all that. And the antibody requires 4 degrees or to -20. You have to record that. And mostly if it is comes in a warm condition, better to return the antibody, because you will be wasting your chemicals on that. So whatever, it is very important that at what temperature you are getting the antibody. So regarding the primary antibody, then we have to also enter the batch numbers, which batch, which lot it has come. Then it comes to the expiry of antibodies, and titration and validation. This is the inventory. If you maintain, you will be able to go trace back or go back at where it would have gone in case if the antibody does not work.
Thank you, madam. I think because of want of time, we will come to the last question of this panel discussion. This is very general. It's more like for the beginners and newcomers who want to start. What's your advice for all these beginners about training and the practice of IHC?
Yeah, practice of IHC. Actually, whoever comes for training to be, I have always asked them to come with a notebook. First thing is, because you have to enter every step, this thing, what is the antibody you are running, and by following all the SOP meticulously and writing down, in case if it doesn't work, we will know where we have gone wrong. That is one important thing. And secondly, devaxing. Here again, devaxing is very, very important, plays a very important role. If your devaxing is not proper, you will have patchy staining. So devaxing xylem should be fresh. If you are fresh in the sense, not for just for one slide, when you are using a lot, you will know where you have to change the xylem, and alcohol, graded alcohols, and the reagents need to be fresh. Endogenous peroxidase needs to be fresh, and your antigen retrieval buffers, the pH ion, which is very important. The higher the pH, your staining will not be working negative. The lower the pH, you will get background. So pH of the buffers are very, very important. And good practice of using a micropipette for a dilution. If you have seen the video, you can see how well Shiv Shankar was micropipetting it. And the micropipette accuracy should be maintained in that manner. So you have to have a good practice of using the micropipettes. And calibration of micropipette. You can calibrate the micropipette from 10 to 100 microliter by using a balance. You you pipette the 100 microliter and weigh it in the balance and see whether it gives you 100 ml. That is one of the things. And further, if you have any problem, you please check the lab where they are running the IHC, or you can also come back to the labs and you can call us anytime.
Thank you, madam. That was a very useful information. In fact, you stressed about simple steps like holding the pipette and pouring the reagents, everything, how much it matters. Really, it needs real practice and guidance by teachers. Like
micropipetting is a very, very important role in IHC.
Yes, yes.
Because you will be losing the antibody also if you pipette extra.
Exactly. That's how you have trained many of the trainees like us.
Yeah.
And next year we'll come to the end of this panel discussion now. I'm thankful to all the panelists, Hema Madam, Shivraj, Shivshankar, and there are quite a few questions from the audience. It's like for the open Q&A session. I think many of the questions have been answered because these are the practical issues everyone will face and they have been answered. Other than this, there are a few questions which we can take up depending on the time. And let's take about this particular question, tips on antigen retrieval using a microwave. Your advice on using microwave for antigen retrieval.
And see, when you are using the antigen retrieval for microwave, ensure the buffer is full in container, because if your slides are not properly immersed during the antigen retrieval in microwave, the buffer solution tends to fall. So thus, if wherever the area which is not within the micro solution, that section will not stay. So main this thing is you have to ensure that your buffer doesn't fall off. So use a bigger container so that your slides are immersed well.
Very useful, man. Thank you. Next question is, how long can we store the aliquoted antibodies? This is for those non-diluted ones, concentrated ones.
Concentrated ones, yeah. See, if your expiry date, if it is a novel antibody where you don't get it frequently, you cannot get it immediately, or such things, you can aliquot and keep it in the -20. And only the working vial you can take and keep it in the 4 degrees and use it. Thus, actually, you can keep it for longer period. Even 1 year or 2 years after the aliquoting, you can keep and use.
Okay, the aliquoted one.
You can store it off in -20 and take the very little quantity, whatever the smallest quantity of aliquot, and use the required amount in 4 degrees.
Frequent thawing.
Frequent thawing. It will avoid the frequent thawing. So what you have to do is you have to do a multiple aliquots and store it.
Now the next question is, what's the time, method, and precautions for buffer storage for a small laboratory?
Yeah. See, buffer storage for a small laboratory, I will expect them to prepare fresh. I will not expect them to store it. Reason is, suppose if they are not using the buffer in another 2-3 days, especially tris buffer can withstand for 2 or 3 days maximum if they prepare and keep it. If it is phosphate buffer, is maximum is 15 days. So it's better that the pH will change it. And one more thing about this buffer is, when you keep the buffer in the fridge and take it out, before using it for IHC, it has to come to the room temperature. If it is not attained the room temperature, there will be a pH variation and your staining will come negative.
There is one clarity question. What is the negative control in IHC? There are actually 2 types of negative control. One is tissue and one is reagent. Tissue means where the antigen in question is not present. So you expect that it should not react. That is negative. So you expect that there should not be any reaction, but if you get a reaction, that means it is false positive and that is compromising it. Another one is negative reagent control, where you don't put the primary antibody, you just skip that, or you replace it with serum or buffer like that. This is mainly to test whether your chromogen is non-specifically reacting, or your second some issue with the buffer or some issue with the reagents. That is the thing. So one is tissue negative control, and another is reagent negative control. One more question was about recommended frequency of EQUAS for IHC. There is no recommendation as that, but if you go by the guidelines, my understanding is that at least minimum one they say, and if you increase the frequency, that increases your own confidence about that. So there is no particular. Anywhere also I asked, they told you have to participate in EQUAS minimum one. And if you don't have an EQUAS program, for example, you have yours is a specialized laboratory, but you cannot participate in EQUAS program, at least you should have an in-house or inter-laboratory comparison. It would always be good if that inter-laboratory comparison, the laboratory which is providing that inter-laboratory comparison is enable accredited. It's like that, but minimum one, I can assure you, but more, at least two would be good, because 6 months it will give an assurance, because once a year will be too wide, you don't know where your things are going wrong. So two will be good. But many of the UK programs, as far as I know, is 4 to 6 like that. Four
in a year.
Because of want of time, we can take one last question. That is, if you cut control slides, do you keep in fridge at 4 degrees? And how long can you keep it in the fridge?
See, control slides, not very longer time. Whether you keep it at 4 degrees, doesn't mean that you can store it for longer period. Long period or any number of months and all. Better that you have the controls fresh, and maximum is 1 month. Otherwise, your antigenity will be lost.
Very, very useful.
You can store the block itself. That is better.
Yeah, that's good. We can have one just last question. Now, any specific protocol or tips for getting consistent ATRX IHC staining? This yeah, this is problem with IDH also and ATRX, but it will be very useful.
Yeah.
At the post
ATRX, actually ATRX, we generally have no problems with the ATRX. With the higher temperature retrieval, give 1 hour incubation period. I think it should be fine. It should be like when what we have put in the slide, the preparation slide, to CDTA at 800 watts for 5 minutes, then followed with the 600 watts and 10 minutes and 450 watts 5 minutes. I think that should solve the problem. In case if you are getting background, use the blocking, little more blocking. You can extend the blocking period, non-specific blocking.
Thank you, madam. I think we can end this Q&A session because of want of time, and I'm sure madam has answered many of the questions. Shivraj, Shivshankar, everyone. And I'm thankful to the panelists. They have really shared their valuable experience and guided us. And we'll now end the session over to Dr. Nufina to continue with the rest of the program.
Yes, sir. It was indeed a very interactive and a very useful session, the panel discussion. So it's a pleasure now.
You're muted. We can't hear you.
Am I audible now?
Put in the chat box.
I have unmuted, sir.
I think that was a fantastic session with inputs from our
Can you hear me now?
Team. We can move on now, and maybe since we are at the end of the session, we would request the president of ICMLS,
Dr. Kaftan Singh and the Secretary of ICMLS, Dr. Pankaj Kaul, to say a few words.
Sir, you're muted. Sir, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me, ma'am?
Sir, we can't hear you.
Hello. Ji, can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if the main server is working.
We have seen us and they can hear.
We are not able to hear.
Hello. Ji, can you hear me now? Ji, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, there was a technical glitch from my side, I think. Respected ma'am, Dr. Anita Mahadevan, Professor and Head of Department of Neuropathology, NIMENS, other dignitaries, panelists, faculty members, Dr. Vani Santosh, Professor, Department of Neuropathology, Dr. Yasa TC, Dr. Nandis BN, Associate Professor, Dr. Silpa Rai, my organizational colleague, Dr. Pankaj Kaul, Mr. Pasa, Dr. CP Pandey, Dr. Surender, and other colleagues and members from ICMLS. First of all, I would like to congratulate ma'am, and especially thanks to ma'am Dr. Anita Mahadevan for organizing such a very informative programs for our medical technologists of ICMLS and other NIMENS, other part of country, they are also participating. Ma'am, really it's a nice feeling and giving a sense of satisfaction and proud feeling to see that our technical staff members, fraternity from lab sciences, medical laboratory technicians, technologists, laboratory scientists are now coming forward for the overall development of medical laboratory professions, leaving aside other salary and other allowances matters. And they are now taking this profession to next level by holding this scientific programs and participating in this scientific activities. Gone are the days, ma'am, when very semi-skilled technical staffs were there in lab sciences, and they were there just to support the basic diagnosis and treatment. Now there is a complete paradigm shift in medical lab services in allied health sciences. More than 50 different streams, including of medical lab scientists, technologists are working behind doctors and supporting the patient care, diagnosis and treatment. And lab is, of course, playing a leading role in modern healthcare system. There is a complete paradigm shift in medical laboratory services in terms of quality, services, competency level, patient safety, increased number of tests, then for trained and qualified human resources, including of facilities. Now we have several thousands of medical technology scientists are including faculty members from allied health sciences, medical lab sciences are working throughout country in basic healthcare to super specialty healthcare services of the country. So we are contributing at every level to supporting the teaching departments. We are supporting the research activities. We are now supporting the diagnostic services. So it's really nice to see that lab technical fraternity is now getting the recognition also from our healthcare system and policymakers, employers. And this is a very good example of that. now they are getting the respect, recognition which they deserve earlier in healthcare system. Holding of such very informative webinar by Department of NIMHANS in honor of our medical technologist, Mrs. Hemavati, is a kind of recognition and gesture, and really a proud feeling for our lab professionals. As an association, it's a privilege and honor to be part of this wonderful scientific event, ma'am. And once again, I thanks and congratulate Dr. Anita Mahadevan, ma'am, who is the head of the Department of Neuropathology, NIMHANS, and her very energetic and dynamic team of NIMHANS for organizing this very informative and very important this webinar for medical technology, especially. Ma'am, once again, I would like to assure you that we are already part of various national initiative for betterment and upliftment of lab professions. So, and we always assure our full support and cooperation as when required by your team or your institute as associations. And thank you again for organizing this event for our fraternity. Thank you, ma'am.
May I now request Dr. Pankaj Kaur to please say a few words.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes. We can hear you.
It is really a matter of great occasion and a noble way of NIMHANS to honor Mrs. Hemavati Umakanthan, a medical technologist honor superannuation, by organizing such a beautiful scientific national webinar in collaboration with ICMLS, dedicated to her long association with the Department of Neuropathology, especially Immunohistochemistry. She being a member of ICMLS is a matter of proud privilege for us, having been associated with her. NIMHANS has really touched me emotionally earlier also during my visit to the institute while participating in ICMLS 2019. There is a tradition in NIMHANS, I think, to plant a sapling on the event of retirement in the campus. I personally imbibed this idea and followed the same footprints on the occasion of my retirement. I too took special permission from DPGI, Director PGI, to permit me to do so. I planted magnolia plant near our research block where I spent 35 years of my dedicated services as medical technologist at PGI MER Chandigarh. In addition to this, I donated voluntarily 107th time blood on the last day of my service at PGI MER. Last but not the least, I wish Mrs. Hemavati Umakanthan, her colleagues of neuropathology and great brains behind the idea of organizing this wonderful academic feast, a national webinar, a big applaud and pray to continue such a novel tradition for the benefit of our existing and budding technocrats for the betterment of patient care. I once again wish Mrs. Hemavati Umakanthan a very healthy and productive life ahead, full of happiness and joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So we are at the end of this amazing and enlightening webinar. I would now like to invite Dr. Shilpa Rao, Joint Organizing Secretary of this webinar, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Nufina. So we have all come to the end of this wonderful webinar, and we hope that you all enjoyed this webinar as much as we enjoyed organizing it. On behalf of the entire organizing committee, I have a lot of people to thank for. Firstly, the Department of Neuropathology is very much grateful to Mrs. Hemavati for her 4 decades of dedicated service to the department, and in recognition of this, we have a small token of appreciation for which I would request our senior most professor, Dr. Vani Santosh, and former head of the department, Dr. Yasha, to hand over this token of appreciation. And I would also like to call Professor Sagar to hand over the token of appreciation. Thank you, everyone. Now, we would also like to extend our thanks to the ICMLS President, Mr. Singh, and also the General Secretary, Dr. Pankaj Kaur, and our own technician, Mr. Pasha, for making possible this webinar a grand success. We indeed have to thank our organizing secretary, Dr. Nandish, for his untiring efforts in putting together this webinar and making it possible today. The IHC team of Mr. Shivraj and Mr. Shivshankar have indeed put in a lot of effort for organization of this webinar, and which we all indeed appreciate a lot. A special thanks to Mr. Monoclonal, who was a videographer, and he spent enormous time and effort to make it possible that we could see the practical demonstration video today. And so we extend our thanks to Mr. Monoclonal. A very special thanks to the whole Department of Neuropathology at NIMHANS for their continuous support and contribution at various levels. And then moving on, we also thank the BME department for the technical support. Last but not least, the success of a webinar is mainly due to all your participation and all the participants who have registered for this webinar in large numbers. Hope you all found this webinar useful. Please provide your valuable feedback, and we look forward to having much more webinars like this in the future. Have a great weekend. Bye. With this, we now end the webinar. Bye-bye. Thank you.